All right, I think we're going to get started. It is so good to see everyone today. I'm Rabbi Perlman, still Rabbi Perlman, and so great to see faces. If you're able to turn on your video, would love to see you. But if not, just so glad that you're here. This is maybe the fourth in our series, our Lunch and Learn series about various topics in Judaism. And today, just to make sure you're in the right place, today we're talking about death and mourning rituals from the Jewish perspective. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just do a bunch of talking on my end. I have a PowerPoint to share. And then what I'm going to do is probably stop the recording for any questions and answers that comes up. We are recording just to make sure we have some of these in place, especially for those who might be looking at times when we're not offering a class like this or a direct session like this to be able to have those resources. So I am, again, so glad that you are here, and I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that right here. Okay. Move you all over for a moment to make sure I can read everything on my page. So today, again, we're talking about death and mourning rituals. So I'm bringing you a text just to start off from the Talmud. I think it's a nice start for why we're doing what we're doing, and not just talking about the topic we are today, but why we engage in the way that we do to be there for our mourners. This is not just a session on what happens when we ourselves are in the place of a mourner, but also how do we as a community embrace and bring together our mourners in ways that are affirming, but also meeting them exactly where they are. So this text from Sota is, what is the meaning of that which is written, you shall walk after Adonai your God, pulling from another text? Is it possible for people to walk in God's ways? Rather, the meaning is that we should imitate God's attributes. Just as God clothes the naked, so too should you clothe the naked, right? So we're going to get these mitzvot, these actions that we're going to do. So for instance, the clothing the naked, we hear about that quite often in our tradition, and we're going to take that quite literally, the ways that we're going to help folks find the clothing that's going to keep them warm and give them dignity, but also all the ways we're going to embrace those who are feeling vulnerable. The text goes on, just as God visits the sick, so too should you visit the sick. And we're going to actually talk about that a little bit more. And just as God comforts the mourners, so too you should comfort the mourners. So it's not just a to-do list for human beings, but actually what we're doing is we're imitating God. We're following in God's ways. These are godly activities, which I think adds even more meaning to what we do here at Temple Isaiah and beyond. So I said I'd talk about visiting the sick. So here's a text from a great book that I see as part of my own molding into what it means to be a rabbi and a pastoral presence, but it is for everybody. It talks about what does it mean to visit the sick, and in Judaism we call that bichor holim, right? Visiting the sick. So Rabbi Friedman writes, we walk along with those who serve in the course of their journeys through suffering, illness, change, and joy. Like Miriam, who stood and watched as baby Moses sat in his basket on the banks of the Nile, our greatest gift is sometimes simply being present alongside our people. We join them at times offering encouragement and concrete help, other times simply witnessing their endurance, their pain, and with God's help, their resiliency. We meet the people with whom we work in the words of the Torah, Ba'asher Husham, wherever he or she is, and whatever they are experiencing, wherever they are. We have our amazing angel network here at Temple Isaiah. Denise and Greta right now, along with quite a number of angels, help to lead that effort and show up. And of course, sometimes, many times, most times in our community, those who are ill are able to find their way back to health. And we pray for that, or a new way of living. We pray that certainly they're able to find their way to recovery. And this is amazing. And we also know in other situations, sometimes an illness does lead to death, but we need to make sure we're always centering what does it mean to be there wherever our folks are. So I share that just to kind of lead into what happens also as one is approaching death in our tradition. So again, in addition to showing up as a presence, whether it's our family, our friends, those in our community, one of the things that can happen, it's not like a requirement like it may be in other faith traditions, but we do have something called vidui. Now you may recognize that word from the Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur season, Slichot. Vidui means confession. And so we do also have vidui, confession, in our tradition as well as some of the last things that someone may say. You could say it on your own, and it can be personalized. It doesn't need to be a particular text. There is a text that could be said, but it doesn't have to be said. It's really about your own coming to terms with who you are. And for some people, that means acknowledging regrets. Not always, but you can see in this like alternative version that's written by Rabbi Hollander. I'm not going to read it, but you can kind of read it through. It doesn't always have to be confession in like a negative framework of just the things that we've missed or regret along the way, but it's really a chance for us to acknowledge the journey that we've been on and to ease our anxiety, our worry as we enter the state of death. It can be said by oneself, but actually, as you can also see in this text by Rabbi Hollander, if one is unable to share it themselves, it can be offered. So I have stood at many bedsides and offered vidui, but it does not need to be offered by a rabbi or a member of the clergy. It can be offered by anybody. So this is something you can, have in your back pocket for yourself, or just the idea. Again, it doesn't need to be a set of words. What is also traditional to say are the words of Shema, and this, which you'll see at the bottom of this slide, as well as the additional 3 words, Adonai Hu HaElohim, which just means Adonai is God. And traditionally, we say this every time we go to sleep because we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen during that period of time. We don't know if we're going to have the opportunity to wake again. And so it is said at the moment of death and sleep, because sleep is actually from our own tradition, 1/60th of death. So vidui and Shema, as one is approaching the end of one's life, if one is, and again, those things can be said on behalf of somebody else as well. Not everyone has the opportunity to do these things, and if you don't, it does not mean that anything will go awry afterwards by any means. These are meant to be words of comfort and to help us mark the moment that we're in. After death, we call this period of time aninut in our tradition. And someone who is in aninut or an onen is what we'd call like the person who's in this period of time. I don't know, maybe another tradition has a name for this period of time, but I think it's beautiful that Judaism does. It recognizes that you are not obligated to do anything during this period of time. All of the regular mitzvot, as it's considered in our tradition, but just like the normal way of living, is not an obligation for you. Yes, you need to make sure you are eating and taking care of your physical body. But one does not need to, from a traditional point of view, go to services or anything like that, go and pray, because we understand, as Rabbi Lamb puts it here, we understand that you're in a different state. Now, in Judaism, that's usually a very short period of time. Sometimes it's a day, sometimes in very traditional communities, but usually up to 3 days. Again, this is from the point of death to the point of burial. So as Rabbi Lamb puts it, right, this is a person who may be in deep distress, a person yanked out of normal life, abruptly catapulted into the midst of inexpressible grief, right? We're understanding disorientation, disarrayed attitudes, emotions out of gear. The shock of death paralyzes his or her or their consciousness and blocks out all regular patterns of orderly thinking. So Judaism does not put the expectation that you need to get back to orderly thinking. We understand this is, again, a very, very particular time. And then, of course, there's the Jewish funeral and burial itself. There's actually not a lot of necessary sections. I get this question a lot. Like, what do I need to do for the funeral? And usually it's relatively open book, so to speak. There are a few things that are we consider kind of necessary to this process, and that's a chesed. That's a eulogy. Those are words of sharing about the person's life. We're meant to we want an honest reflection of someone's life, but it's, we're usually lifting up the good, the memorable, the pieces that we're going to carry on in terms of legacy. And that can be offered by family, by clergy, by combination friends. It is good to speak of the person who's passed on. That's how we continue to carry them with us. We often share Psalms. That's very traditional as well. But in terms of a necessary piece, El Malei Rachamim, God full of compassion, is a very particular prayer that is offered at funerals. And then when we move to, some funerals can happen just at graveside. It has to happen in different places. You've probably seen a combination. But when you get to burial itself, it's important. That's when you start Kaddish, not necessarily before. Which is why sometimes I get approached about why names might not be included on those pamphlets that you might see on Friday night if someone's passed. Sometimes people ask for that, and we will absolutely. We're from synagogue. If someone wants, they're starting Kaddish early, that is fine, and we're happy to include it to help honor their loved one. Traditionally, you don't start saying Kaddish until after burial, and so that's why sometimes it's not there. And so that's the first point when you're after you've done the burial itself. In Judaism, we really want to honor this vessel, the body that has carried our soul. And so we take care to do what I often call the highest mitzvah, because it's not one that can be repaid by the person that you are doing this mitzvah for through burial. So we take part in the burial itself from a traditional point of view, so that eventually that person can go dust to dust, ashes to ashes. We usually use a very simple box. Again, these are customs, minhagim, not requirements. I can even speak for my own life. When my mother passed, I wanted it to be relatively traditional, and my father, for whatever reason, that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to pay for a more elaborate casket. And we had long conversations about it, and that for whatever reason, that was something that meant something to him, and kind of how he had grown up, not with the simple pine box. And so that we did that. We also did tachrachim, shrouds, and other various traditional elements. But so again, I say these are customs. But usually, kind of that simple box is meant to evoke that we're all the same in death. Right. You don't need the fancy casket. You don't need the fancy clothes. You don't need anything. Right. We all return to dust. And our bodies will eventually decompose and return to the earth. And so that's part of that burial process. I will talk a little bit about cremation later, but I can also mention it here. We also get this question a lot. Cremation is not traditionally a Jewish way to honor our dead. There is a growing trend, and that's okay. Everyone should make their choices for themselves. But if one wants to be following Jewish tradition, we do burial of the body. We keep the body intact while we have it, and then we let nature do what nature is going to do. But of course, as I think folks know, Temple Isaiah clergy and our community itself will honor, of course, the wishes of families and individuals and whatever they want to do. We also have we've also participated in what we call green burials. And that's a different decomposition of the body burial. And so I'm happy to talk with folks more about that as well. So after burial, that's when we start kind of counting the clock anew. The period of Shiva, which sounds like Sheva, because that's where it comes from, seven. Period of Shiva starts after burial. So you count the 7, not from death. You count the 7 from the burial itself. And it gets a little more complicated sometimes with longer. If there's cremation, it's often a longer period of time before we can get to burial of the cremains, if there is going to be a burial of cremated remains or not. So it gets a little bit complicated, but traditionally, if there's a burial, it starts at burial, and it follows through for 6 full days. And then the 7th day, it ends after the morning. So normally that's after like Shacharit, the morning service, because traditionally one is having services in the morning as well. But however you may count in our community. So it's what we find often here at Isaiah is that folks will usually do 1 to 3 nights of Shiva, but you should do whatever, again, is meaningful for you. We usually start with a meal of condolence. And that's usually immediately after the burial. Again, for some families, it's not the right fit just based off of time or place. But usually it's a chance for that first meal after burial, a chance for mourners to be comforted. Traditionally, when mourners don't go up to others, people are supposed to come to them. So if you go to a shiva and the person who's mourning doesn't, and they may come up to you, and that's totally fine. But if they don't, maybe they're following this traditional piece where they need to be greeted by the mourners. And so I think there's a lot of education for our community, just, Jews in general, or anybody going to kind of a Jewish, to a shiva, or after it's this idea that we are supposed to show up, not wait for them to give us permission to come up. We are supposed to come in. Traditionally the house is unlocked, the door might be open. You're supposed to come on in, as opposed to knocking, and someone else, then the mourner has to come and open the door, right? So this is from a traditional point of view. But I've gone ahead a step. So there's often a meal of condolence, and then the section where it says the pitcher of water and cup are outside can also apply to the shiva house itself. Sometimes the meal of condolence is in the shiva house as well. It just starts the shiva process, kind of leads directly one into the other. So if you ever see a pitcher of water and cup outside, again, a custom, it's traditional to wash one's hands through this process. We gather together for Shiva as an opportunity to surround the mourners, but also to provide an opportunity for them to say Kaddish, right? Because there's an obligation traditionally to say Kaddish as a part of their mourning process. You need a minyan, that's 10 Jews to be able to say Kaddish. So that's why it's really important for folks to come on out and surround the mourner so that they have that opportunity. If they don't have 10, in our community, we want to make sure to do that kind of, regardless, but obviously we would prefer that there's 10, and for some folks, they don't feel like they can without 10. One can certainly should say Kaddish on Shabbat, of course, and can still be with the community, but like sitting Shiva, we don't usually put on Shabbat, because the idea is one could go to shul, one could go to synagogue to do that. From a traditional point of view, there are particular customs you may see or do yourself, right? So it's covering the mirrors, and that's just from the point of view that when we are sitting Shiva, we are not, we're not so worried about what does the hair look like and the makeup look like, right? And again, it's not meant to be, you don't have to take care of yourself, but it's just meant to, that's not the priority it doesn't have to be the priority if you don't want it to be, right? However you are is how you are. I said the word sit Shiva because there's a tradition that you are sitting, and oftentimes low to the ground. One might have a low stool they sit on. And it's just supposed to be symbolic of the spiritual state that you're in. And there's also a tradition of brown foods. And the reason is, right, that's kind of like the circle of life, right? That's what we're representing. On that, the end of Shiva, however you're marking it, traditionally on that 7th day after burial, it is traditional to take a walk around the neighborhood with those around you, those who are there, because it is that symbol that you are re-entering and starting the world anew, right? And to be accompanied by those around you can be really meaningful. That was actually a very powerful personal experience for myself, to walk around the neighborhood. Not that I hadn't been outside or walked a little bit before, especially with the dog, had been walking. But just knowing that that's what that moment specifically was for, felt like I could take a breath more deeply than I had in the prior week. Just some more terms to make sure we know what we're talking about. So like I said, after burial starts kind of this new count for how we think about the year. Those first 7 days are the Aninut, those before burial, right? That's its own, intense time. Then we have Shiva, which of course is the very, very intense time. One is in a period of Shloshim, that's literally the number 30. We get that from several sources in Torah. When Aaron and Moses pass away, we hear the community sits for 30 days, part of the origin for this custom. But like in 30 days, like that, you're definitely in a different state. that's the period of mourning, right? For most, of course, we know that we mourn in lots of ways for our lifetimes, but that's this period of more intense mourning than before. And there's a change after that 30. We could consider ourselves in the period of Shloshim right now from the attack on October 7th, right? Yesterday marked 30 days, and I definitely treated myself like I was in Shloshim. And so, yeah, so there's still definitely in mourning, but obviously as time moves, we know that we move as well. So it's 30 for relatives. Although if you are mourning a parent, the tradition is to mourn for 11 months. 11 months. And the reason there is we don't say a whole year from a traditional point of view. There's an old custom that it's like that I don't ascribe to or recommend, but an old custom that like you're saying Kaddish is helping your loved one, move on and be judged well. That's an early theological premise that can be problematic, right? That and if you read it positively, it's that our prayers can have impact. But I know it can be very troublesome as well for folks, who don't keep up the ritual of saying Kaddish in quite the same way. And I would prefer to frame it as, which is why I often extend it to 12 months, because it just makes more sense for folks to think about it in the process of a year. To think about it is this is mourning a parent is unlike mourning anyone else in your life, and so you're mourning those who gave to you in a very particular way. Why 11, not 12 from a traditional point of view is because supposedly if you refer 12, it's the case they did anything wrong in their lives, they're being judged during this year period of time. But we all know our loved ones weren't that bad enough, so we're going to bring it down to 11, lest anybody think if we pray all the way to 12 that indeed they did have many mishaps and mistakes during their life. Again, that's an old ritual. So mourning for about a year, and from a traditional point of view, that means like pulling yourself out of joyous events, like dancing, that kind of thing, at parties, and but for most folks, what that means is saying Kaddish out loud every single time you have the opportunity to say Kaddish out loud, or seeking out minyanim to say Kaddish. And for those of us who have relationships that are, with folks who, there's nothing to say that you can't extend that ritual. So, God forbid, right? We are mourning for a spouse or a child or someone who is a parent-like figure to us. You need to find the mourning ritual that is the right one for you. But very distinctly, we do have these stages. And I think that's helpful for all of us to help us frame, I do need to live, right? I could, for many of us, we could continue just to live in our mourning. And Judaism explicitly gives us not just the permission, but the demand to say that you are alive. And thank goodness now you still have breath, and our loved one would want us to keep going and to live this life. And so we make that change after 30 days, or in the case of a loss of a parent, after that year period. Traditionally, one is obviously we are mourning for anybody we're in mourning for. Traditionally, it is seven figures in our life for whom one is obligated to say Kaddish and to partake in these mourning rituals. So a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, a spouse, or son or daughter. Or you can think about it as 4 categories: parent, spouse, child, sibling. So when we get to so after this period of time, after the Shloshim, you're able to do an unveiling. A lot of folks think they need to wait the year. You don't need to wait the year. Anytime after those 30 days, you can do an unveiling. Sometimes it takes a while to order the stone and get it in place, and but a lot of folks will do so in the year as a way to mark the yard site. But anytime before that is fine as well. It is traditional to have a marker of some kind, a matzeva in our tradition. You don't necessarily need clergy there. You can certainly, Isaiah, if you want clergy there to help guide you through that ritual, we're happy to do so. Some folks will also just gather together when the stone is set in place and use as an opportunity to say Kaddish again, an opportunity to share stories, personal stories. That's what I do when I join families. It's another time to elicit, what meaningful events are we remembering? What legacy remember? What smaller events, even, quote, non-meaningful, whatever that is, like that's the moment, that's the essence of who they are. And of course, then it is meaningful. I get the question a lot, why do we leave stones as opposed to, flowers or something like that? It's just the permanency. There's nothing wrong with leaving a flower or anything like that, but the idea of leaving something that's going to die, right? So instead what we do is we leave something that will stay and endure, and that's supposed to be evocative of memory, right? And how that person is staying with us and in our heart always, like a stone, like a rock. And so we leave that stone as a sign that we've been there, and that person is still in our life. And so oftentimes that's the first time we're leaving stones, because the permanent marker is there. Although you certainly can leave stones around just the nameplate that's there until the marker gets in. And then I do want to share, just again, so make sure that folks, I know sometimes we throw out these words and it's good to know about them. So yahrzeit refers to the anniversary, the yearly date of death. And then so after that year, so again, you would say Kaddish every time for those 30 days, at least if you're mourning a parent or anyone else. We call that in the period of Shana, the period of a year. You would say it every day for that year. And then after that, it's on the anniversary. Traditionally, you can do so on the Hebrew calendar, and you have a choice when you're here at Isaiah. You can put it on the English calendar or the Hebrew calendar. And if you haven't had the conversation, it's usually put on the English calendar, unless you let us know you prefer the Hebrew calendar. For a lot of folks, people will remember the date in the secular calendar instead, and so that becomes meaningful for them. We also have Yizkor, which just means remembrance, from Zachor, to remember, right? And that's a public observance for our whole community, for those who have passed on. We traditionally do so on Yom Kippur at the very end of Sukkot, which is Shmini Atzeret, but also in our traditions, in the Reform tradition, Simchat Torah, Israeli tradition, they're kind of combined. So it's Simchat Torah in our tradition. Longer story about why that is. And then it's Passover, Pesach, on the last day. So for us, the 7th day, or in other communities, the 8th day, and Shavuot. So again, Yom Kippur, Simchat Torah, Pesach, and Shavuot. We always have an additional Yizkor service here, a chance to remember. If you have a yahrzeit candle, you would also, you could light that on the anniversary of the death on the yahrzeit, but sometimes there's a tradition, not sometimes, but you can also, it's traditional to light a candle, a Yizkor candle, on Yom Kippur, Simchat Torah, Pesach, and Shavuot as well. So I do want to take this opportunity to share something else with our community, and I'm hoping that you already know about it, but just in case, I'm going to use this opportunity to tell you about it. So this is our Temple Isaiah website, and I have, the way I got to this page is I just went to the regular temple-isaiah.org site. I went under life cycle, I went all the way down to end of life, and I ended up on this. Ooh, well, I can do it now because I pulled myself off. I hit end of life right there. And we got this whole section around some of our end of life things that we want you to know, some of the cemeteries, Oakmont and God Shalom, that we're associated with. And we have this link, Temple Isaiah Guide to Death and Mourning. I believe Debbie Frank is on this call. So Debbie and I worked on a Temple Isaiah Guide to Death and Mourning. And I want to show you, I'm not going to go too far into the document. I know I'm moving a little bit quickly here, but I want you to know that there's this resource for you. It is, I know we're going to update a little bit. This one was written during the COVID-19 pandemic. But you can see there's a lot in here on some of the subjects, which I covered now, and subjects where you can dive in a little bit more. So for instance, what is the Jewish view on euthanasia? How do you, with very specific details, how do you pre-plan your funeral? And we recommend that if you're if you want to get things ready in advance so that your family need not wonder what your wishes were, or to financially take care of it beforehand. So it doesn't, then it's just taken care of, right? What does this mean for your own wills and trusts? And of course, after death, kind of a quick go through of what does that mean? Who do I call? With numbers to Sinai Funeral Home, which is that's the Jewish funeral home in our area that we will guide you to. Different topics here, around, I get the question a lot, like, is it okay to be an organ donor or to donate your organs or donate a loved one's organs? Yes. From a very, very, very traditional point of view, there's something about keeping the body intact that has to do with a full burial that we were talking about before. But to save a life, we consider to be a higher mitzvah. So definitely, most Jewish organizations would say that that's the primary mitzvah there, and so that is what we recommend as well. So it's okay to do that. So there's quite a lot in here, including how you make choices around what does it mean to plan the service. We always recommend calling the synagogue on the very, very early end, so we can help you through this. Sometimes people will ask, the funeral home has told us, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the funeral home has told us we need a shomer, a guard around the body, and we need tachachim, these funeral shrouds, and those are all things that you can choose to do from a traditional point of view. Again, traditionally, to have the body, you're supposed to have somebody with the body, and so that is something, to not leave it alone. And again, there's a lot kind of written about why it's a sign of respect, but also in the very ancient days, we're not so concerned about that now, but folks were worried about stealing items or anything else. They just want to protect the body. And so that's part of it. And a shomer, someone who's there, will often share psalms and things like that at the same time while they are keeping watch. And again, just these burial shrouds. You'll often hear me say on Kol Nidre, on the Erev, the night of Yom Kippur, or just when the Yom Kippur is beginning, that we're wearing a talis, which you only wear at night on this particular day, because Yom Kippur is this rehearsal for death. And that's because you may wear it again. The only other time you may wear it again at night, unless you're leading a service, and that's just a sign of a service leader, but maybe in death. Because in addition to these shrouds, one is traditionally buried with their talit as well, with one corner cut, because it's no longer a usable in life talit. And so that sometimes we pass down talitot, prayer shawls, to the next generation, and that's great and beautiful. And sometimes folks are traditionally, one is buried in their talit as well. And so there's a lot of detail. This is a many page document. You can see more about the hesped, the eulogy, and some helpful information around, pallbearers. That's the people who carry the casket. And what does it mean to have children at funerals? And then everything else that we talked about, those low stools and how we count our days, and why do we cover a mirror? You'll also receive from the funeral home and or from Temple Isaiah, a Shiva kit from Isaiah that's put together, Lisa Metzner and our Angel Network, and really just an amazing crew of folks, some of whom I think maybe on this call have done tremendous work to create like a bag of materials that will include a Shiva candle, if you're not getting one already from the funeral home, this guide, usually in printed form. So that Shiva candle is a candle that's going to burn for 7 days. And that's just, again, it's a symbol of this period of time to help us mark the time. You can load it out at night and when you're not home. In fact, given that we are in a fire heavy area, I actually recommend that. to make sure, again, safety of the of yourself, your family, and your community needs to be paramount. So some people wouldn't sink or something like that. But if it's a safety issue, it is perfectly okay to blow it out and to relight it when you are home. So you'll get that. What else will be in the kit will be, sometimes there are stones for when you want to go and visit the grave, and there'll also be Kriya ribbons, which I didn't talk about, but I'll do so here for a moment. A Kriya ribbon, we first hear about someone tearing at kind of their clothing or themselves when Jacob thinks that his son Joseph has died, right? When his other sons come home and say Joseph's been attacked by this beast, and all we have is this bloody coat, and we read, Jacob kind of tears at himself as clothing, and that's and then kind of throughout our tradition, it's that kind of becomes the tradition for, it's this outward sign of the tearing that we feel on the inside, right? How we all feel torn and broken. And for some folks, there'll be an actual item clothing from Shulchan that they tear. Sometimes it's tie, a shirt. But usually what folks do is wear a ribbon that we start to wear at the funeral, and it's torn, and it's a symbol. One tradition is 7 days you wear it. Another tradition is 30 days you wear it. But at the very least, I usually ask people to continue wearing it. If you're not going to wear it on your person, have it nearby, pocket, purse, nightstand. It's a reminder. It's a kindness to those around you when you're wearing it. Meaning they know to approach you a little bit differently if they understand what it is, but it's also a kindness to yourself. I know why I'm getting upset, when I shouldn't get upset about something. I understand. We give myself some slack. I'm in a different period of time. I'm, of course we might know it intellectually, of course, this person has just passed away in my life and they meant everything to me. And, but we might not always be thinking about it in quite the same way. And so any kind of physical reminder, which is why we do the mirrors and the ribbon and so forth, to get us just to be, and then it's okay to not be okay, essentially. But you're going to see a lot more in here, and a lot of the things that we discussed with more potentially more detail in here as well. And then of course, Debbie and I put together these additional appendici, is that the right word? But appendix with some of these materials as well, and some readings that might be helpful for you. And so it's again, you can see 30+ page document with quite a lot of information. So I've thrown a lot out there at you. I wanted to make sure that you had some of the rituals around death in our tradition, some of the why. And what I'm going to do is allow for some questions and answers. If they're kind of generalized, I can keep recording. But I also, if we get into any questions where we don't want to record, since I've shared the majority of the material, I can turn it off. So any questions? And you can kind of let me know if I should turn it off or not. Just kind of raise that virtual hand or unmute, and you can share.
Rabbi Margaret here. Can you speak more to green burial? Mm-hmm. And also, it's a terrible, in my opinion, descriptor, but have you heard of composting? Is there any kind of teaching around that, please? Both the green burial, so you're not in a cement vault where you actually are in the dirt, and the composting.
Yeah, here, I'm gonna turn this off just to allow for more conversation.
Rabbi, when you talk about that